But stuff like this is going to be across the course of the lecture, and so we're going to be having a little bit of fun as we go. But since this is a lecture, we're starting off with a pop quiz. So you need to flex your Meyer knowledge. This is going to be worth it for you if you want to dig on in. First up, on your phones, drag your thing. What year was Meyer's magnum opus published? What, 1570? You get candy.
Oh, hell yeah.
And most of us got it. 1571, he did have a treatise then, the Rostock manual. So 1571 is not far off as well. Next up, what weapon did Meyer say was the basis and origin of all weapons? One-handed weapons. We got the doocy, the doosack. We got to do the do. That's what I'm doing today, the do and the do. And I'm going to throw candy at people still, because it's really fun to throw candy at folks. Where was he traveling to when he died in 1571? February, we just passed Meyer's Day. Let's figure this one out together. Not Basel.
I'll say Spire because it rhymes with Meyer. Mecklenburg.
Let's go in the back. We got Mecklenburg showing up first thing, and you get some candy off the bat. Let's go. That's why you show up last. This one's a little bit harder. Drag your dot. This is a map of Strasbourg. Where did Meyer get married in 1560? This is harder, but this is on the theme of the day, which is why I want to give us a little bit harder here. Who is this one?
Oh,
let's fucking go.
Jason.
You're the closest.
Yeah.
It's actually this church right there. That's St. William's or St. Guillaume. Si vous avez la français, oui. But in this case, this is where he got married, in Strasbourg. That's actually where Huygens Brack and his family all hung out. That's Temple Neuf. He actually fenced right there, which is kind of cute. What weapon is not named in Meyer's body of work? Not named. Not necessarily practiced, but not named.
Saber.
We got a saber guess.
Boar spear.
Who's our flail pickers? We got some flails. Candies are all around. I have more I have to get out of the pack, though. So flail's the only one not mentioned. Dagger he treats on. In his armored section, he names saber explicitly in his armored section. He calls it sabel. And boar spear gets an offhand mention in the rapier section. He says to defend against a boar spear, use this technique. So that's a little bit of a weird red herring.
Does he show flail?
He shows flail in the background with two kids in one of the woodblock prints, but he doesn't name it ever.
Gotcha.
What was his oldest sister's name? Sophia, which is a really nice name. And draw a picture. What did his dad do? He was somebody who made something. Meyer made knives and swords and things as a cutler. What did his dad make?
What did happen? Okay.
He was a papermaker.
Oh, okay.
So this is going to be our time today. We're talking about the family and origin of Joachim Meyer. Those last couple questions where we started to dig into his parents, his sister, and all the crew there. This is something that's been a mystery for a long time. And we've known about Meyer and studied his stuff for over 20 years, but the actual origins of him have been a mystery for a while. And what's kind of fun about this sort of thing is that with Meyer, he's relatively a well-known biographical person. Talhofer, Otjud, don't know anything about him. Meyer, we have his birthday, we have records of him in the historical, but it kind of starts at 1560. We had nothing about his early life, even though we knew he came from Basel. So today, we're going to dig into the stuff about that solidifies his actual origins and thing from there. But to do so, with my work and with my research partner, Miriam, who helps me out with my translations and things, she's the best and is amazing. We're going to dig into this, but we need to start with the origin of the universe. So does anybody know, like, how did we know that the Big Bang was a viable theory? What was the first clue that we saw that led us towards the Big Bang? Any science nerds? Lights has to do with lights.
Cosmic microwave background?
Yeah, cosmic background radiation. We saw this background radiation, everything moving away from one another. And we can speculate that if we start at the end and we see this end result, we can work backwards towards the origin. And that's kind of what we have to do here in order to actually get into where Meyer came from. So we're going to start here. This is a note months after he died in September of 1571 from the Basel archives. And this is the first solid piece of evidence that allows us to build a record for where he actually came from. This is a note that mentions not only Joachim Meyer, the cutler and free fencer in Strasbourg, but also names his brother, George, who died a few months after him, and his mom, Anna Freundt. So Anna Freundt, they spell it 30 different ways. This is the big thing that actually ties him to a parent off the bat explicitly. It seems in this case that George died a few months after his older brother. And so some of the inheritance that came from Joachim, probably to George as one of the male siblings, is now up in the air again because now he's died. So his mom is going, can we just sort this out and get it figured out, and all these bits and pieces. So it's basically a lot of complicated legalese. And then this. I call this the smoking gun document because it's the thing that kind of ties everything else together. There's also a name here, Hans Turing. This is going to come up a lot. So keep that in the back of your mind. But using this, we can then go one step further and say, we now know his mom. Can we find his dad? So on your screens here, we're going to have this cosmic background radiation that we've now found. We need to start working backwards and try to tie Anna to a potential father. And luckily, we have other primary sources where we can do that. So here on your screen, see if you can find him. Joachim's dad is inside of this document. And I want to see if you can find him and underline him. And Anna's also in this doc as well. This is the work that me and my research partner Miriam do. We find documents, we transcribe them, we pick out names and places and things and try to figure it out from there. And this is the paleography. I always get the word wrong for how to read old things. Never mind.
Paleography?
Thank you. Oh my God, I needed that. This is the sort of thing that we do here. And these are the kind of things that tie us to the history in a way that I quite like. Who's this? Let's fucking go. Hey. You get prizes all the way around. This is Jacob Meyer, the papermaker, and his wife, Anna Freundt. Boop. Connection made. We're starting to work our way back towards the Big Bang. We have the wife. Now we've got her husband, aka Joachim's dad. And this is not the only record of these two as wife and husband that we have. This is another property sale document that names them both, again with papermaker, again with citizen of Basel and his wife Anna Freundt. So this isn't some one-off, hey, maybe this is who they are sort of thing. This is both of them being connected very, very solidly. But now our goal is to get back to that singularity. Work our way all the way back to the origin of the Meyer universe, which is his birth. And luckily, this is quite easy. This is a record that we've known for quite a long time. The parish records in Basel have been digitized for a while. And so we've had this record of Jacob Meyer, a papermaker, being the father of a Joachim Meyer in August 16th of 1573 at the St. Alban parish in Basel. And this is our guy. All the books that you read, all the stuff about swinging swords at nerds, this is him being baptized. It's not a birth date, so you could take this and minus a couple weeks. They tended to be pretty snappy with getting baptized in the day. It wasn't like a 3-month later thing. It was, hey, you're a tiny baby, let's go. They're all Reformed Protestants, so they're not big on original sin, but those sort of things, they stuck still. So people were still getting baptized quite early on. This is one of many different things that allows us to draw this through. So this line is now complete. We've gone from establishing a mom to connecting mom and dad to connecting dad to son, and bingo bango. 25 years of, hey, where'd Meyer come from? Easy. Mainly because of that one there. Not so bad. So we can now point to the exact place that he was born. You can go and visit it. You can go walk the streets and say, yeah, that's where Jackie's from. I love calling him Jackie and Big J and stuff. Master Meyer grosses me out. We've had a whole bunch of different records in the past that we thought were his parents. This is the real one. This is one for Tobias Meyer, a weaver who had a kid, Joachim, in 1531. This one people thought might have been him because he's just a little bit older. And this puts Meyer pretty young when he was actually publishing. The first one was like 23 years old. He put out his first book. And then this one is Jacob Meyer. He's actually the pastor at St. Alban. We're like, oh, St. Alban, Jacob Meyer, this must be him. And these we can all throw out. You can still find them in the records. And this dude definitely knew his parents, but they're not his dad. So all those things can be swept aside. And now we've got a really good foundation to build off of. We know a dad, we know a place. So can we get more? Let's talk about Jackie's dad. This is Jacob Meyer, the papermaker. This isn't the only place that he shows up. He's not only there as a father baptizing children and all those bits and pieces or selling property. He shows up all over the place. Sometimes in the Basel Urfadenbuchers, in the property sale records we saw earlier, and those parish records. These Urfadenbuchers are pretty cool. These are court documents, basically books that were a mixture of kind of plea deals and bail. So if you got in trouble for something minor, for example, for mischief, he was blaspheming and basically talking shit, so they threw him in jail for a night, you would pay a little bit of money and say, I swear, I'm not going to do it again, and they would let you out. So it's a little bit of a plea deal. Yes, I did it. Sorry, and they let you go. This was really common. Tons of people showed up in this. You get in trouble for a whole bunch of little infractions. The second, he missed watch and was fined and jailed for it for a couple of days. This one's specifically interesting, and I've got a map on your phones now. This one mentions a place, the St. Alban-Tor inside of Basel. This is the neighborhood that they grew up in. And my challenge for you is see if you can find this location. And if you have an idea, I'm gonna come around and bring you more candy if you can find it. It's a little finicky on the small screens. It's a little annoying, but if you can find a St. Alban-Tor, look for a tower by a church. That's your main hint. This record speaks to something about citizenship during this era. And it's true for Meyer when he was living in Strasbourg as well, which is if you had Bürgerrecht, your citizenship of one of these city-states, you were required to be part of the defense of your city, whether it be part of a militia called up in times of war, whether it be part of you being in trouble here. Look left. Left. Part of the Night's Watch, you were required to actually be a part of defending the city, getting called on fire duty to keep crowds down. And owning armor and arms was an integral part of being a citizen during these sorts of things. So having this degree of involvement in the defense of the city was a huge deal. He was at the St. Alban-Tor, just didn't show up. And that's a huge deal. You're supposed to be watching the gates at night and you didn't show. Joachim Meyer, because we now know his birth date, nailed it. He was probably 11 at this time. Nailed it. He would have remembered this. We remember things when we were 11. He would remember, oh yeah, my dad got thrown in jail for a couple of nights because he missed watch. And this is something that Meyer would have had to do in Strasbourg as well. He owned arms and armor just like his dad did, just like his brother, spoilers, did for a little while. And this is something that kind of brings that idea of why learn this stuff to a head. So he would have not been unfamiliar with his dad coming home with a breastplate and, sorry, Mike, breastplate and helmet on and saying, all right, how was watch today? Oh, it sucked. I want some wine and that sort of thing. So this is not rare. He dies about 1563. My current hypothesis is that he was a plague victim. The plague was running around from the French Wars of Religion at this time. Some of his neighbors died of plague, and we know that because they're more famous than he was, and they actually wrote it down. So my hypothesis is that he died in 1563 because his heirs start paying his rent. That's a pretty good sign that somebody else is picking up the pocketbook and spending for you. He also shows up in that 1571 record. Freundt is remarried by then, which is kind of the end date of when he might have been by. I found this last month. So, hey, fresh new stuff, unpublished. Let's go. This is also going to be what we're researching next and digging into. It's kind of cool. He also likely wasn't a very big player in the papermaking industry. There were a whole bunch of papermakers who owned mills, did fancy stuff. They helped put out laws and ideas about papermaking, and he probably just worked for one of them. He's not showing up in the records. I chatted with the paper museum there, and they're like, hey, I don't know, he's just some guy. So likely wasn't a big player, but they did have some money, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, that's his dad, but what about George and his siblings? How many did he have? On your phones, chuck a guess in, and we're going to see if we can get this down. Who guessed 13? Let's go. That's the closest one. He had 12 siblings. So there were 13 brothers and sisters. The Meyer family was huge. We went from, I don't know where he came from, to mom, dad, 12 siblings, bang. 2 died in infancy. A couple got baptized a few times with the same name, which is a sign that one's gone, let's try again. One's gone, let's try again. This was pretty common during this era, and investigating other fencing masters, they did this a lot. Here's Hans 1, here's Hans 2, and then I'd keep scrolling and I'd say, oh no, there's Hans 3. And it's kind of sad because you kind of see somebody's life unfold by the baptismal records getting repeated. and it always kind of bummed me out. There's one that's like a couple of twins, and then the next year there was the same name. That's like, oh shit. So it was one of the more depressing things to dig into. 3 of the baptisms have Papermaker in the name. All of them happened at St. Alban Parish. None of them had an overlap that made it impossible because the human gestational period is 9 months. So none of them were somehow 7 months, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. And only last month, I actually found a contemporary index that has all of the baptisms accurately indexed on it. So somebody who knew him went, oh, Jacob's back. Cool. Baptized, page 11. So this solidifies it. That's Joachim Meyer on page 11. That's Sophia on 18. And it goes from there. That was one of the big missing pieces that made me go, nope, these are all him. These are all his siblings. Solid, decided. Because that dude is not some guy in the 18th century going back. This was the scribe at the actual parish going, oh, what's up? And actually writing it down while they were there, which is kind of fun. Joachim was the oldest out of the whole crew. Sophia was the next born. Hans Jacob, his first brother, was third, all the way down to 1559 with Gabriel Meyer, his youngest brother, along the way. Some of these may have died in childhood as well. The only ones that I can definitively say are Esther, because she gets repeated 3 times. And the ones in bold are those that we have extant records of after they were actually baptized, so outside of the baptismal record. The reasons why are various, and we'll talk about them. But this is still a pretty good data set. I honestly would have expected more with 12 siblings, which is a little bit of a bummer. But what are you going to do? Time, things, destroying, and stuff that's not digitized, which is hard to find. So let's dig into some. So Esther Meyer died young. 2 of them were born and then croaked. The second is actually the one that's not indexed correctly. And you can kind of tell why. If anyone can read this, golly, this is a doozy. It's bad. It's rough. So I think the scribe might have went and skipped it because it was too hard. Esther Meyer 3 is the one that actually digs in. And there's a familiar name down there on the bottom right. It's your boy, Hans Thuring, showing up for the 4th time so far in this talk. This record shows up a couple of days before the smoking gun record that has Anna Freundt and Jacob and Joachim Meyer connected as mother and son. And for some reason, she's getting her guardianship shifted to Hans Thuring. His wife was her godmother. She died by this time. But for some reason in 1571, she shows up in Basel and needs to have her guardianship shifted. Why? This is one of the big things. Hypothesis?
Because both her father and oldest brother are dead.
Father and oldest brother dead. Why would it matter if the oldest brother was dead for her to get the guardianship shifted? Where would she have been if that was the case?
Living with her brother.
With her brother in Strasbourg. So there's this record that says, it's Joachim Meyer's widow and child when he dies, one of the letters that gets sent out, but there's no mention of a child in the actual letter. I wonder if it was her. She shows up with Apollonia for that letter of, my husband's dead. And they go, oh, look, there's this kid. They go, no, it's his sister. And so they don't write it in the note. And then she goes back to Basel after he's died. So he might have been palling around with his sister because his dad died in 63. They go over to hang out with older brother. He croaks, back home. That's one of the big mysteries that we're going to be digging into. But it's one of my largest hypotheses, and I've been building it over a while, and it's kind of interesting to see. Now, his brother, though, is a little bit more exciting. He was a Messerschmitt, just like his brother was. He was a fencer, just like his brother was. And this was actually the record that spawned my whole piece of research. He shows up in 1564 in Strasbourg to request effect school. And I had this mistranscribed. I had the name as Hans Taub, Hans Dove, a Maurer, a job title, Berger und Messerschmitt, and Cutler of Basel. And I said, well, that's 2 job titles. That can't be right. So I looked at it again. It said Hans Jacob Meyer. That's the same last name. Messerschmitt, that's the same profession. Basel, that's the same city. That's too many coincidences to be a coincidence. I looked at the index for this, for Joachim Meyer, went back 1 page. Hans Jacob Meyer Papermaker, son. He had a brother named Hans Jacob too. That's too many coincidences to be a coincidence. So this was likely him. after his dad died, coming by and seeing his brother. So he fenced together. This is the only record I have of it. But he shows up down the Rhine. Kind of cool. His bro hanging out, coming by and visiting and doing some fencing. My brothers visited me in Denver when I lived there to come and do some fencing. If any of you have fenced with siblings before, Meyer did too. It was kind of nice. A little bit of humanizing what he does and taking down the air of mystery. Bro pops by. Let's go do some fencing, dude. He also shows up in the Basel or Faden books, those books about Baal and things. On your screens, I have the primary sources that you can zoom in on. They're in the same order here. He gets in trouble for a bunch of different stuff. He misses watch, just like his dad does, like father, like son, whoopsies. He talks a lot of shit and gets in a big old battle with a gunsmith who he's not paying goods to. He pursues officials with a weapon. He says he's gonna fucking stab somebody. He was not the most chill dude in the world. So Hans Jacob Meyer, maybe another reason why Esther went to Strasbourg, Hans Jacob was a little bit of a dick. Or as a humanizing approach, maybe he was just freaking out because his dad died young and he's a young dude in his 20s in a city and now he's got to do things and this was him being in a place of trauma. Who knows? But we can look at it in different ways. The last note's especially interesting because he shows up to fire call. There's a fire happening and you have to be, as part of a citizenship, go out and defend things. He shows up, no armor on. What the hell, dude? You're supposed to have your armor. It's the fire thing. You have to keep crowds away. Oh, I forgot it. It's at home. They show up, no armor. He had sold it, didn't have it. You're supposed to have this as part of citizenship. And this guy, cool, he keeps a slovenly household. If he doesn't budget better, he's going to be up to his neck in some shit. So they threaten him, say, fix your house. So Hans Jacob was not the most chill brother in the world. More things like maybe some of our own families are going, yeah, I got that text again, down the way. So Hans Jacob is an interesting dude. There may be more records about him, but these are the digital ones that I can dig into. But there seemed to be no bad blood. The scribe on all these notes is the same, Nicholas Imhoff, the notary. And one of the Imhoff family shows up as one of the godparents for Hans Jacob Meyer's kids. So maybe he's just doing his job and Hans Jacob, and they ended up having one of them as a godparent, which is kind of nice to think about too. Like, he's all right. We'll show up and be a godparent for him. Not so bad. Now, this is something where we have more to explore. Those are all the records we have of his siblings. And this is due to a few reasons. The Basel parishes were annoyingly neglectful in certain ways that they kept their records. So in all of the baptismal records, they don't mention the name of the mother in many of the parishes up until the 1600s. Strasbourg always does that. And it's one of the easiest ways to actually pull people together because they are a little bit more loosey-goosey with how they spelled things back in the day, to put it lightly. So you go, cool, is this the same Wolf brand? Because it says Brandt with a T. Oh, there's the wife's name. It's the same person. And we can kind of go from there. And they don't do that at all. They also have no marriage records for most of the parishes until the 16th century. There's one that has a gap from 1530 until 1721. It's like, no. Why would you destroy these records? Some nerd needs it in 2025. Come on, guys, keep them. So there's more to explore, but we can kind of go from there. And we're going to transition into talking about his neighborhood more than his family. So I want to take a pause and if there's any quick questions about his family before we start to shift into where they actually lived. If not, we'll keep it rolling.
It doesn't say why they didn't show up, right?
No, there's a lot of reasons. There's, with anything that old, there's the whole document loss versus no one wrote it down in the first place versus they wrote it down somewhere that didn't matter and it's just not archived or indexed properly. So there's all kinds of reasons why, but luckily now we've got a really good baseline to stand off of. We know where and who and why. And now if you ever see Sophia Meyer, there's no other Sophia Meyers. If you ever run into one, yell at me, because that's going to be one of the easier ones to actually pull into. But let's talk about Basel, the place that we now know where he lived, where he grew up. All you nerds probably found St. Alban-Tor right next to his church of St. Alban there. This is flipped from your own mask there. In this case, north is up, south is down. On yours, it was opposite, which I didn't tell you as a bit of a spoiler. This is the Rhine. It runs that way towards Strasbourg. And there's actually an old wives' tale that they would say, if you put a pot of soup on a barge in Basel and went downstream, by the time you got to Strasbourg, it'd still be warm. So they were both very interconnected cities. So him going from one to the other is not unfounded. These are something that's pretty close together. This is the neighborhood in which he lived. This is St. Alban-Vorstadt, the St. Alban neighborhood. And on the right's contemporary with both the St. Alban Tor highlighted. And you can see some of the exact same streets from the 15th and 16th century preserved. We have St. Alban-Vorstadt on both lines there. We have the Malzgasse, Muhlenberg, Albental. You can see them almost overlaid with one another, still preserved to this day. Thanks Switzerland for not getting into wars and remaining neutral. They didn't get bombed that much. That's one of the large reasons why. So they didn't have to rebuild 10,000 things. And here on the right are a bunch of the things where they worked. So St. Alban was known for a lot of their smith work and building stuff. They had a couple of streams that ran through the east side of the neighborhood, and they have a bunch of these paper mills that still stand today. These are original. Some were built as way far back as the 15th century and got kind of refurbished over time. Some were slightly newer, as in 16th century, but these are still preserved. They're functional, and it's the Basel Paper Museum. So if you go to the paper museum and walk around, that's where his dad worked. You can walk the same halls and see the same beams and go, yeah, that's where Jacob was. And Joachim probably showed up on Bring Your Son to Work Day as well, because I'm sure they had that in 1542. Who knows? But this is really cool. A lot of these areas are well preserved. And so this is also where these two property sale documents we talked about earlier take place. They're both in St. Alban-Vorstadt, and they contain clues as to where he lived. Hans Thuring, again, selling paper, selling a property to the crew. We have their parents here. This one is a little bit longer. It's like 5 pages long, so I didn't include the whole thing. And on your own screens, I've got some clues for you. These are all of the clues that I was able to grow and build out of these different papers. And I want to see if you can find where they lived and approximate it from there. This neighborhood is a mix of old houses from the 15th, 16th century, more modern stuff that got built, but there's a surprising lot of original stuff. And the large structures that you see on this screen are still preserved today as a bit of a hint, including in some cases, some of the trees that are there. You could also go to Basel today and walk these same streets and make that guess physically, because this still exists. So here's a little bit of a dig. We've got a fountain here, a fountain here. We've got trees all over the place. This is their approximation. Load faster. Let's go. This is supposed to be the cool trend. There we go. So we have along the Rhine. It has to be butted up against the river. We have the Linden Tor and some linden trees. This was a place called the Linden Tower, where they had like social events and they drank and they partied. It was kind of a guild house. We have neighbor houses. So it has to be in between. It can't be on the end because it said between two houses and across from the fountain. So that's where his parents lived. And last month, I found a record from HGB 1 and 2, a series of property analyses that they did back in the early 1900s, combining all of these sources to actually match up the different properties on contemporary maps to the property owners that owned them. So we can get even more precise. They lived here, 47 St. Alban-Vorstadt. That's his parents' house. Done and over with. The records also say there's Gutmann's next to it. There's Stalker's next to it. That's one of his godparents, Talaker. That's where his parents lived. It matches everything that we talked about. It's across by the Rhine. It's got a garden. It's between people. All the other records line up. It's multiple sources that build this record. That's where I got the note about him being dead in 63. And guess what? It's fucking gone. One Muhlenberg, still there. Peter Gutmann, the wine grower's house, still there. Talaker's house, 43, still there. 47 and 45, demolished in the 19th century. They put a new house in. Of course, I think it's butterfly effect. Months ago, I was like, oh man, if it's the one right across there that doesn't exist, that's going to be really ironic after all this work. And of course it was. So I probably destroyed this by thinking about it. That's how physics work. We talked about the Big Bang. Now we're going into metaphysics. It's killing me. Killing me. So you can walk the streets, you can go to the site where his house used to be and see where Joachim Meyer probably would have visited. They bought this house in 1558. So this was by the time that Joachim probably would have been on his waltz and doing apprenticeship and might have even settled in Strasbourg by then to start working as a cutler. He would have been 21. So he probably didn't live here, but all of his siblings did. And his heirs paid for this house up until 1576. So well after their death, they were there for a while. So this is where they live. You can go and walk these streets. There's actually a building right here called Zum Hohen Dolder, which was a guild house that they all drank and partied at. You can walk in there. It has a bunch of the original stuff. It has a couple of swords up on the wall that might be Victorian reproductions, but they're cool looking anyway. So if you're in Switzerland, you can go there and go, yeah, this is where Jackie's from. That was where his house was. This is where he used to hang out. His dad worked here. And you can walk the streets with a great deal more confidence than you could before you walked into this room. Hey, kind of fun. One data pool that we've not dug into yet, though, are his godparents. All of those records for all of those 12 siblings all had godparents written down for them. This was a kind of a layover from the Reformation. The Catholics were big into godparents and what that meant and all those things, and the Protestants, they broke off and they went, we're going to keep the godparent thing, even though a lot of the reformers were like, let's not do it. And they went, no, we're going to keep it because it's nice. And they kind of kept that tradition going during this era. So all of them had godparents, and a lot of them were big players in the industries. So multiple of the godparents owned the mills that are still there today. Schaffhauser and Kielhammer, Durr, Thuring, Threisen, Husler, Tegenhardt, and a prolific printer, Hieronymus Curio, lived right down the street, a few doors down. He died from the plague in 63. He was one of the ones who I think might have taken Jacob Meyer with him. This kind of interconnectedness. On your own screen, there's actually a web of the godparents analysis that you can scroll up to. This neighborhood was highly interconnected. All of the people were all there together. They worked together. They sold property to one another. They were godparents for his other children. They were neighbors. They had disputes. This isn't something where it's like, cool, he lived there, he had parents. They went, this was a neighborhood. They lived in a way where they knew each other. And this kind of perspective of all the folks who know each other and can have that elbow up, I think helps humanize this even a little bit more. This is a living, breathing place in the early mid-1500s. It's not just some weird thing where here's a mysterious fencing master and his family. It's like, yeah, that was his pal. Hans Thuring, the one who sold him the property, is guardians for his kids, helped do all of these things. He owned one of the mills too. He probably worked for him, for fuck's sake. But this is the kind of thing I find really interesting and really motivates me. Hieronymus Curio is the namesake for Hieronymus Meyer. Oh, you're a fancy printer and you live down the street. I'm going to have you be my godparent, and a way to kind of curry social favor. Annoyingly, Jacob Meyer doesn't show up as godparents for any of their kids, which I think also indicates that maybe he was a little bit lower on the rung of social ladder, which might speak to why would Meyer want to become a fencing master? Climb the social ladder a little bit, get to hang out with the fancy people, because your dad's just some dude, but I'm a fencing master. Hint, hint for later on. These places are actually still existing. Martin Klug at the Basel Paper Museum has been insanely helpful. I've been corresponding with him for email for quite a while now. Their main shop is in the Threisen mill. The dude who was one of the godparents. The Thuring mill is the main museum. That's the most likely place where I think Jacob Meyer would have worked and where Joachim would have gone to hang out. The museum restaurant's in the Durr mill. Durr is also one of the property sale witnesses to the sale document. Like, these were people who were all super connected to one another. And so anytime you see one of these names as I'm doing research, I'm like, oh, I know them. They piled down here. They lived there. They probably went out for wine. Like, there's a degree of humanization with all of these connections that I think is so interesting to see. So this is also a way of me kind of hypothesizing around the why of Meyer. There's this odd thing of there are thousands of fencers who fenced in Strasbourg. The whole list of people from like the 1550s until the 1600s who showed up to do fecht school is innumerable. Most of them are out-of-towners, but the vast majority never wrote anything. Leinhard Solinger shows up. Meyer shows up. Paulus Hector Mayer shows up, but not as a fencer. And so why is it so rare? Why would this dude suddenly put out books? And maybe this is why. This isn't new to him. He was a fencer and a messersmith, but he grew up around printers. Some of the biggest dudes. You can buy books that were printed by Curio on eBay for a lot of money. You can find these things still existing. So perhaps the idea of publishing a book wasn't something far-fetched or weird to him. He's like, yeah, you write a book. I know the Papermakers. I can get paper on the cheap from down the river. It's right by. I might go home and visit dad. Oh, do you have that manuscript book? Awesome. I'm going to do some writing in it. He might have known printers and people back there for his early ones as he's building up things. This is something that might bring down the barrier of why he would do this huge push. So this is something that kind of starts to bridge the gap between biographical stuff and the actual fencing. Because when we're fencing and we're going out there to compete, we're not exactly giving a shit about this stuff. You know, nothing that I've just shown you helps you throw a better shield how or interpret the fucking rose how any better than every other interpretation on YouTube that you're dealing with. So this is something that sometimes feels extraneous or extra in HEMA. But I wanted to have you guys kind of jump in here. On your phones, you can type an answer if you'd like, but why? I've spent probably thousands of hours doing this now over the past 3 years of research on people in Strasbourg and Basel. I spent more time doing this than I have doing fencing over that time by an order of magnitude. But this why question I find to be very interesting because it's something where you'll get that spectrum of HEMA folks. You have the massive history nerds who want to play a little bit of dress up and then not wear masks because they didn't wear masks and then they don't actually hit each other. And they say, we're doing real historical HEMA. And then you have the sport HEMA on the far side, and we're going to wear all black and bounce and do this sort of thing. And there's that spectrum of people disagreeing and arguing, but I find this to be really invigorating no matter where you are. But for us, why? Any ideas? I just want to open the floor and discuss. Is this something that's important to you or has talked to you at all or find interest? What do you think? And like that idea of not existing in a vacuum. The context of what was written, the ways that we can talk about these things. And when we actually do interpretations and start fencing, the humanization of it.
All of that, and then the ones that really got me were finding stuff on the maps and really grounding it in a physical place. Because like you have the humanizing elements, but then like being able to locate like where they were and where they had been, like down to the actual street number.
Yeah.
Is really, really cool.
Yeah, I find that kind of grounding and humanization something that's rare in HEMA. So many of the early KDF folks and for Fiore, you go, yeah, I know what city he's from, but that kind of high detail that lets you kind of think like, yeah, he could be sitting there. And you could be like, hey, how's your brother? Shitty? Yeah, I know. Yeah, dude. And that sort of thing is so interesting to me. This is one of my largest motivators of why I do all this. I've written stuff about the other Fechtmeisters of the Strasbourg era and their families and where they lived as well. We have property numbers for where George Kellerly lived, where Wolf Brand, another fencing master, and Marksbruder lived, George Frieder, another Marksbruder and fencing master. We know where they lived, what they did, their disputes with the council about taxes, all of these things that make them a real person. And there's a degree in HEMA where when people call him Master Meyer, or people say like Fiore in a fake Italian accent as an American because they want to sound, there's a little bit of me that kind of goes and gets a little bit grossed out. And this humanization makes me more motivated to do it because it's not some dude on a pedestal. He's not a fancy fencing master. He was a guy. And we know where he lived. And we know that his dad bought property and they owned some vines. And he had 2 sisters that died when he was young. And that probably affected him. And it makes him just more of a human being. And so as you're reading the books, it's not some miraculous God figure. It's Jackie. And that, to me, is just such an interesting way to kind of bring ourselves out there and start doing fencing and going, yeah, he could probably be here and going, fuck yeah, this is so cool. Yeah. And how's your day? And you could talk about your day with him. And it's not some miraculous, crazy thing that you have to be like, oh, yes, sir. Okay. Yeah. And doff your cap. It's our boy. And he'd be like, oh, what are you guys doing? You got masks. You can actually wail on each other. That's another Meyer hot take. He would love our gear, but that's a whole thing. But this sort of thing is one of my largest motivators. And whenever you read my articles and things, this is why I do it. is when I find, oh, there's another baptismal record. It's his sister. Ooh, and there's another family member, and I've got a sister, and that's so cool. And here's his nieces and nephews. And that to me is one of the biggest drivers of why I spend my thousands of hours doing all of this. And we're not done. We have a few ongoing hypotheses, like inheritance and guardianship. His dad dies in 63, and then a few years later, he can actually publish a really big-ass, expensive book. I wonder if he got maybe a little bit of fucking cash coming down in inheritance, and he went, oh, I'm going to use that, and actually use it to do things, which is why his wife is like, sell those books, please, come on, after he dies. He also had another fencing master in Basel named Hans Baumgartner. This guy's also a dick. In 1558, he was actually given citizenship in Basel with a social position as a fencing master. So unlike Strasbourg, this does not exist. They had someone as the city fencing master, it seems to be. And he got it in 58, Meyer's in Strasbourg in 60. Maybe this was exclusive. Maybe he would have never left his home city in the first place. Maybe this would have pushed him to find somewhere new. If I can't be the fencing master locally, I'll go down the Rhine. He actually gets in trouble and kicked out of Basel. He gets exiled in the mid-1570s because he goes to Freiburg and hangs out with a bunch of prostitutes. Whoops, bye. So maybe his Strasbourg move was not actually intentional. Who knows? I have to dig around this note to see if there's things that Meyer applies to, and we say no. That would be very cute if that existed. I'm guessing no, because there's never anything that nice and cute. There's also the mystery of who trained him. And the Smiths Guild, we now know, have 3 fencers within it. Joachim, his brother, and then Hans Baumgartner, all cutlers. 3 cutlers from the exact same guild in the exact same era, the exact same age. Seems like there might have been a dude there that might have been the fencing master. I've also found no other Basel fencing masters who are like, oh, here's our buddy, he's a cooper and a fencing master. These are the only ones I really know of who do fencing from there. So maybe this would give us a mystery towards where to look for records to find that kind of other origin of Meyer that might be a little bit more interesting to the Meyer nerds of going, there's the guy who actually trained him. I actually found a note yesterday, 2 days ago, of a guy from Bologna who shows up in Basel in the early 1550s and is selling books for all those Marozzo-Meyer connection conspiracy theorists. Anyway, we also have a few more. Is this my mystery slide? Yeah, mysteries, cool. Like where his siblings went. Will they show up again? Did they get married? They show up in some record as someone else's wife, and then there's just a record that's not digitized I haven't found yet. We have so many siblings that hopefully we can track them down a little bit more. The apprenticeships and training, all of the Messerschmitt Guild records are not digitized, so it requires an in-person visit, which we're planning on in the future. So there's a lot of records there that just haven't been dug into yet. And so maybe since we have some more names and dates, we could actually have a little bit more of a barrier of entry. We don't have to look from 1530s until onward. We've got a pretty good barrier. These are the bumpers of where we should look for. And why did he shift to a cutler from a papermaker? Why would you go through that from my dad works here, we've got all these godparents who are all mill owners. He had the connections. Why change?
His dad was already kind of low on the totem pole. Maybe there wasn't like opportunity for advancement, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe that social rung was a little bit more cut off. If you're not a mill owner, you're a worker. And if you're a worker, you're not going to become a mill owner because so perhaps this was a way of social mobility and career mobility that maybe would have shifted through because both him and his brother did it. So maybe his dad was like, get out of here. Don't follow me. Don't go to med school. You're going to get in debt.
It's really interesting because he's the oldest, right?
Yeah, he's the oldest.
So like you'll expect the eldest to
exactly.
carry on the family heritage.
Yeah, he leaves the city. He doesn't follow his dad's footsteps. His sister might have gone with him. His brother stays in as a dick. So the oldest son going off and doing things is a little bit odd. We have records of a different fencing master in Strasbourg who's a brickmaker, and then his son takes over the business, and they're like guild master. We're dealing with tax levels and shit level of people. He doesn't fence though, so he's boring. So who cares? So there's a lot of stuff that we still have to dig into, and this is going to take a lot of in-person trips. So Miriam is going to be doing a trip later on. She's brilliant. She's my research partner, and she was the one who actually went through and digitized these records in the first place for us. So shouts out Miriam. None of this would have been possible without her. But Our future plans are to travel, dig into some of these hypotheses. I'm emailing the Basel Paper Mule and the local guilds I've been chatting with. They still exist. The Papermakers Guild, the Cutlers Guild, they are all still around. And then I have a bunch of open source documents. Everything that you saw here today, you can dig into yourself. That links that you were seeing, they're all open. You can go to the primary sources, click on them, zoom in, redo my translations if you want. All of it is no barrier. So all of these things are available on my site. We'll have a link later on. But I just wanted to kind of extend some final QA time. That's the end of content and stuff. And if you want to type in a question on your phone, that's available there if you don't want to raise your hand. But any other questions or things about what we saw today?
How about like a race against time? Or these documents?
Likely no, it's not a race against time. The main difficulty is that lots of them are not digitized, so they're stored in a way that you have to literally go request them ahead of time, go get them and take pictures. And the issue with the Basel archives, it's a double-edged sword. If they have a ton of records, but most of them aren't digitized. So I have this wish list that just keeps growing. Of I want to look at this one, I want to look at this one, and each one of them is hundreds of pages long. So they're not in danger of going away, but there's a little bit of a danger of there's just so much to dig into that it's going to take a really long time. So, but that's Meyer, and that's his life and origin. And I love that we now have a good pedestal to bring our own researches on. And if you're a Meyer practitioner and you're going to compete later, just think of like, oh yeah, this one's for Esther. Let's go. Yeah, Esther 3. And share it with folks. This is my Substack. This is where I research, where I publish everything is through here. I've got things about the other fencing masters in Strasbourg, his student, Weigen Brack, who Joachim Meyer trained, who did more fencing than he did, and all of his details of his life. All kinds of stuff are here for you to explore. I publish here fairly regularly. Again, it's all free, no pays to get through. Links to all of the primary sources, so you can just click on them and be there, like we did today with maps and things like this. And this is what I've been doing for the last couple of years, more than actually fencing, which is why I hope I don't lose at Sabre later, but we'll find out. So that's us, and I'm Liam, and I'm so glad that all of you came here today. And look at that clock, 11:29. Absolutely nailed it. Oh my God. Oh, thank you, everybody.